The first time that it ever happened was with a female babysitter. I was 8. You know, your mom drops you off and nobody's there except you and her, and the next thing you know, um, you're in the dark and you're sweating and your clothes are off and you don't know why and you don't know what's going on, and it's a very confusing thing. My most vivid memory is the smells. The smell of the room, the smell of the dark, the smell of my own perspiration. It just smelled like something was happening that shouldn't be happening. I remember about the third or fourth time thinking, okay, just do what you're gonna do and let's get it over with. One of the things that happens when you're abused is you feel less than human. And for me, that's what I felt like. Do I even matter? Why should I be here? If that can happen to me, then I surely must be less than an ant. Within sport, I found that I could control my destiny. If you worked hard enough, if you executed the right mechanic, if you followed the formula as an athlete, then you would be rewarded for that. So that was a way that I not only escaped, but found a lot of validation and a lot of identity as I grew into an adolescent, a teenager, and a young man. I think my happiness came from being good at baseball. I accepted a scholarship to the University of Tennessee. Ended up being a first-round draft pick by the Texas Rangers. I felt fantastic. They had offered me a contract that was, I think it was like $810,000 plus some money for school if I ever wanted to go back to school, but certainly more money than I had ever thought about having. I hopped on a plane and flew down to Arlington, Texas. We head to the doctor's office. They put me through all kinds of tests. I felt like I passed every one. I didn't have anything to hide. I never missed a bullpen, much less a start in college. Headed to the stadium, and I was going to get to meet Nolan Ryan, who was a childhood idol of mine. And so we get up there to the offices. My agent comes to get me, and his eyes looked watery, and he took me in the office where Doug Melvin, who was the general manager of the Texas Rangers at the time, told me that they were going to take the offer off the table because they felt like there was something wrong with my elbow. They weren't sure that they were even going to sign me. It just opened up a lot of what I had felt as a damaged youth after being abused. Just you're inadequate and you're broken and we don't want anything to do with you. I'd been just barely hanging on and had a wife to support who was abandoning everything to help me chase my dream. And we fought a lot. I felt like, I couldn't provide what she needed. My velocity had really dropped. What once was a 92-mile-an-hour sinker was now like an 86-mile-an-hour sinker. I could see the writing on the wall. What I had to offer, it was time to say goodbye to that. I had thrown a knuckleball and some bullpens in practice, and Oral Hershiser noticed that I had a pretty good one. And so they suggested to me to become a full-time knuckleball pitcher in 2005. When I came to spring training in 2006, I came as a full-time knuckleballer for the first time in my career and had all this hope of breaking with the team, being one of the starters and really getting to do it differently. And sure enough, I made the team. And in my first outing in 2006, I tied a modern-day Major League record for the most home runs given up in a game with 6, and promptly got sent down the next day. And not just sent down, but taken off the roster.
Quite a story, isn't it? Welcome, everyone, and good to have all of you here. Good to have those of you who are online with us as well. So that is a guy by the name of R.A. Dickey. He was a knuckleball pitcher in the major leagues. And I don't know if you know much about baseball, but knuckleballers are kind of a rarity. In fact, I just checked this morning. In all the pitchers in all of Major League Baseball right now, there's one knuckleballer out there. See, most pitchers, when they pitch the ball, they're counting on speed and pinpoint accuracy. So some of these guys can throw the ball like over 100 miles an hour. And then you add to that a slider, a curve, a breaking ball, an off-speed pitch, and that's what they do. And I will tell you that when they place the ball over the plate, they can hit a spot the size of a grapefruit. They are that good. They know exactly what they're doing, and they know exactly where the ball is going to go. And that's what Dickey was doing as well until they found out that he had this problem, right? Knuckleballers are different. Instead of 100 miles an hour, these guys throw 60 miles an hour. But what they're doing is they're releasing the ball so it doesn't spin. And so instead of the ball going for pinpoint, it's doing this all over the place, you know. And of course, nobody knows where the ball is going to go exactly, not even the pitcher. Well, as you're going to discover, Dickey became very successful, but it took a while to get there, as you can see. In fact, I might call that something like a wilderness that he was in for the longest of times. As you heard, it started when he was very young, and it wasn't just the babysitter. A little later on, he was marked by some guy, and some guy molested him. And not only molested him, but there was some violence, some abuse that was going on, physical abuse along with it. And of course, Dickey did what we all do. He picked himself up and started over again and again and again. And each time he started over, he was beat down again and again and again. And as he said, it's every time you get beat down, it's like you're lost, you're alone, you lose your confidence, you feel less than human. Ever felt that way? I mean, the other thing about Dickey is that he was a Christian. And over time, though, after getting beat down enough, he really believed that not only was God absent, but that he was on his own to do this himself. We've all felt that way, I'll bet. Lost, alone, no affirmation, sometimes maybe even less than human. We felt that way. Getting beat down over and over and over again. And then we look to God, and it feels like he's up there someplace, and we're down here. And it's like either he doesn't see us, or else, worse yet, he sees us but remains silent. And so we begin to wonder, is he there? Where is he? And we begin to believe that we have to do this life, this wilderness thing called our life, all alone. Well, let's stop there and sing. So we're in the middle of this year-long series called Focus on Jesus. And from Advent to Easter, I'm trying to do things kind of chronologically as best I can. There's no real great way to do that because there's 4 different Gospels that do things in different ways. But I'm trying to give you sort of a chronological view of what happens, one thing to the next thing to the next thing. And so today we're at the baptism of Jesus, and we're looking at it through the eyes of St. Mark. And you heard Connie read, thank you very much, Connie, read the story. It's a pretty Spartan telling of the story. There isn't a lot there. And as a preacher, the temptation for me, we're talking about temptation in the wilderness, the temptation for me is to fill in the blanks with the other 2 gospel writers that tell this story, with Matthew and with Luke. But I'm not going to do that today because I think there's a madness to Mark's method here. I think he's got something to say, and let's just kind of hang with it. So, let's review. Jesus is baptized by John in the Jordan. And it says immediately when he came up from the water, the heavens are opened. Except they're not just opened, they are ripped apart. The Greek word is schizomeno. Have you ever heard the term schizophrenia or the term schism? Torn in two, personalities torn in two, people torn in two with schism, right? That's where it comes from. And so, and Mark's the only one who tells it this way. I think I've mentioned this before in a sermon, but it fits here as well. And so the heavens are ripped in two. And through that great big opening, here comes God's Spirit. And it descends on and into Jesus like a dove. And then there is this voice from this wide open heaven that says, and it speaks to Jesus, "You are my beloved Son. I'm pleased with you." Notice, there's no conversation between Jesus and John here. John's saying to Jesus, "Oh, well, I shouldn't be baptizing you. You should be baptizing me." That's not there. This is all you get. That's all there is. And it looks glorious. I mean, you can imagine the light coming down from heaven. It looks affirming. It looks hopeful. It looks all those things. Well, read on. So the very next sentence, the Spirit of God, that same Spirit that ripped open the heavens, came down and lighted on Jesus as a dove and spoke these words of total affirmation. That same Spirit drives. He doesn't lead like it says in Mark. It drives Jesus into the wilderness where he's going to spend 40 days, which, by the way, is Bible code for a lifetime, in that wilderness with the wild animals being tempted by the devil. Isn't that interesting? Same Spirit. I'd never noticed that before. It just popped out at me this week. And so Jesus is there, right? And it's a wilderness kind of like our wilderness, isn't it? In fact, it is like our wilderness. He's driven out to the place where we are. And he's out there by himself. I think it's also interesting to notice that as Jesus is there, he's by himself, all alone. And he's being tempted like we are, and he is by himself completely. He's in the place where we are. And this, I believe, is why God said, "You are my Son. I am pleased with you." He's pleased with Jesus because Jesus has gone to the place where we are. He's pleased with Jesus because he takes on not only human form, but he becomes, he also lives the life that we live. I think it's amazing. And you know, when we think of Jesus, we think, well, he did it differently than us because he's Jesus and we're not. But that's not the point here. The point is that he comes to us. He lives the life that we live. He knows the hardship. He knows the trial. He knows everything that we know. In fact, if you read on from the story, what happens is that Jesus lives his life, struggles like we do, and then towards the end of his life, he's ridiculed, he's hated, he's challenged, and eventually we make him less than human, hanging from a cross. And as he breathes his last, he says, as we say, "Why have you left me alone, God? Why am I all by myself? Why have you forsaken me?" He takes even that to God. Even that he takes to God. So that in the most desperate of times, God is with him. God stays with him. And because God stays with him, Jesus walks this earth, and we are saved by him because God is there. Let's stop.
In my darkest moment, I was sitting in a driveway with a rubber hose duct taped to the exhaust pipe and run into the driver's side window with the window rolled up and a towel packed around the slit that that window created, with my hand on the key. The only thing that saved me in that moment was that feeling that God was sitting right beside me in the passenger seat and whispering to me all the while, "Do not turn that key. I've got something else for you." My life from that point on really centered around trying to live the next 5 minutes well, whatever that meant. I invited Anne, my wife, in to tell her for the first time about my abuse and my story. I was totally ready for her to walk out because that's what I felt like I deserved. And she did the opposite. And she completely embraced me despite what I felt like was the ugliest things about me and about my past. I began to risk things, risk relationship, risk trusting people, risk trusting other men, which I had never been able to do. And I began to discover that God was in the middle of all of it. Like he has designed me for relationship. When I started to care less about what my performance was and more about the process, I began to be better. I began to get better as a baseball player. And also, that paralleled my growth as a human being. The knuckleball can be a metaphor for what it's like to let go. When you throw a knuckleball, well, the only thing that you care about is releasing the ball towards its target without spin. And to release a ball that doesn't spin, you have to surrender to the outcome in a way that you don't with other pitches. For me personally, God's in my mechanic too. He's in the process. So the surrender for me doesn't happen when I release the pitch. It happens when I wake up in the morning, having to surrender to every moment from then until I close my eyes again at night. I think the complete surrender is what I'm most infatuated by.
I love the metaphor of the knuckleball, don't you? I think it's just amazing. So, we're talking about being in the wilderness. We're talking about Jesus being tempted. We're talking about the temptations that we face as well. The temptations, of all the evils and trials and troubles that we face, the greatest temptation we face is to believe that God is absent in the wilderness, that we are doing it by ourselves. And so that's why I like the knuckleball, because we're not. He's there. And I know it sounds like pie in the sky, but this is real life. It isn't once you have Jesus, everything's going to be great. It's a daily struggle. And in that struggle, the temptation is to believe that God's not there. But he is. He stayed with us. He not only ripped open the temple, but when Jesus died, there was a temple, or ripped open the heavens, When Jesus died, in the temple, there is this curtain that goes from the top to the bottom. And on one side is God. You never see him. There's always behind the big curtain. And on the other side is us. And when Jesus dies, he breathes his last. That curtain is schizomenos. It's torn in two. God is there even in the most desperate moments of our lives. And I know it's hard to believe because it's real life. But there he is. And as you begin to discover that, you start throwing knuckleballs. And you don't know exactly where the pitch is going to go. You're not shooting for pinpoint accuracy. You're not trying to throw it 100 miles an hour and blow it by the batter. It's not about you. It's about a relationship that you have with God. And walking through things that are difficult with someone who you cannot see. My greatest hope for all of you is that as you face those trials and as you walk through that wilderness, that you will see and know how God rips open the heavens in Jesus Christ so that you can walk with him every single day of your life. And for that we give him thanks and praise. Amen.